Good evening and welcome. My name is Henry Raybould. I think I recognize a few of you here in the audience. Perhaps you've been in my store. That's Raybould's Bakery. Let me tell you a little bit about Raybould's Bakery. It's not just a bakery. Called a bakery, not just a bakery. We started out as a bakery here in Glasgow down on Green Street, on the square. And we made beautiful baked goods. That's breads and cakes and strudels and all types of wonderful, wonderful things. And we decided, my uncle used to be a confectioner, so we decided to begin making candy as well. After the candy was such a success, we just moved right along and opened a grocery store just right there on the square. And we became quite successful, and my wife Nellie, I'll tell you more about my wife Nellie later, but my wife Nellie is such a fine cook that she decided to open the restaurant right beside the grocery, but actually it comes into the grocery. And we serve wonderful meals at the restaurant, breakfast, lunch, supper. Let me tell you something, you'll hear all the finest folks in Glasgow in my restaurant. It's a great place to eat. I invite you down to eat someday. You'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it great. Let me tell you a little bit about Glasgow. Glasgow's a growing community right now. Here in the 1880s, Glasgow is approximately 1,500 people, and we're growing every day, leaps and bounds. The county of Barron has 20,000 in it now, and that enables me as a grocer, a restaurateur, a baker, and a confectioner. I can buy most everything I need right here in this county. I buy my eggs. I go down to Robert Meyer's mill and buy my flour. He has a grist mill down there, and I get my meal there as well. We sell in our grocery beyond those things. We sell preserves and jellies and jams. We sell Dr. Price's extracts, and we're very proud to sell Dr. Price's cream baking powder. Sell only the best stuff. Come down, you'll see. You'll see. Like I said, Glasgow's a great and growing community right now. Besides being in the food business, I come from the old country. I come from Bavaria, where there's a lot of skiing and ice skating and things which are done in the cold. Let me tell you the latest endeavor I have. You've driven out Burkesville Road, no? Out to the edge of town, you see the South Fork Creek out there. Well, if you notice a dam which is built right there beside the Burkesville Road, that's my dam. I built that dam in order to build a big pond over in the field right next to South Fork Creek, and it's only for a reason. The reason is to pack ice. We let that pond freeze in the winter, about 5 acres worth. Freezes in the winter, we run the sled out on the ice, saw it into sections, and pack it in the ice house. And it lasts all year long until the next winter. We use that ice for local ice boxes. That way we can keep our meat and our milk fresh and cold and good to drink. Also, off of that ice comes the crushed ice, and we chip the ice off of that. And in my restaurant and out in the town, women are using the ice to cool their drinks. It's a great thing. Let me tell you a little bit about my history, the way I came to America. As I say, I was born in Bavaria. In 1844, I moved to the United States, moved to America when I was of the age 23. My family came over and we met up with an uncle of mine, Uncle Fritz. Fritz lived in Elizabethtown, and he was quite the entrepreneur. He opened up a cobbler shop. He opened up a bakery. He was a confectioner as well. So I bought a little piece of property from my Uncle Fritz. I opened up a bakery with my friend John Heller up there, and for 2 years we were very successful in the Elizabethtown market. But in 1869, a date I will always remember, there was a fire and it burned the square in Elizabethtown and burned the business district. Well, it displaced us, financial ruin, the whole works. So I decided, Uncle Fritz carried me long enough, I needed to move away. So I moved to Burkesville. Burkesville looked pretty neat. It was there on the Cumberland River. It was a town of enterprise, and I thought I could be successful in Burkesville. Nah, didn't work. We stayed in Burkesville for a couple of months and then decided to move on to Glasgow. Glasgow is the town of promise. Let me tell you, it's a wonderful town. Glasgow has been very good to the Raybould family, and I hope we have been just as good to Glasgow as it has been to us. I tell you a little secret. There are many successful folks in Glasgow, but there are many folks who are needy as well. We are running a little project right now where we help the needy folks. There has never been anyone to show up at my grocery or my restaurant hungry that walked away hungry. We are proud that we're able to help some needy folks. I hope that someday we have a system by which we can help those folks. Let me tell you a little bit about my wife Nellie, and then I'll let you go on up the street. My wife Nellie is my soulmate, my wonderful girl Nellie. Nellie was Nellie Armand, and I met her here in Glasgow when we married. Nellie is very talented. Besides being the cook I told you about, she also sings like a bird, sings at many of the functions that we have in Glasgow and Barron County. And she has recently taken on a project of her own, and she's the organist down at the Presbyterian Church, which is down on Washington Street in Glasgow, one of the old churches in town. And she plays that organ and sings like the angels. What a woman she's been, and what a great wife she has been. Well, I've told you a little bit about myself. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will come down to Rayboud's. Let us feed you a little bit. I think we serve you some strudel, and you will like some of the old country stuff. Have a good evening.
Hey there, folk. My name is old Matt Bransford. Best I can recollect, I've been here about 14 years. Bought here from Nashville, Tennessee when I was 15 years of age. And I believe I've been here, getting about 14 years now. You know, other day, I had a fellow stop in here from New York. He come up here on a great big horse. He said he was a Union soldier. Kind of heard some gunfire on the other side of that river over there. He said there's a war going on. Well, you know, I don't know much about war, but I kind of enjoy being here at Mammoth Cave. Just the other day, I saw some fellas come up here with some gray uniforms on, and I really don't believe they like much with each other. Now, I'll take anybody in the cave that wants to go into the cave with me, but folks say, make sure that you don't get them guys in them blue uniforms and them gray uniforms on tour at the same time. It didn't seem to work out last year when I did that. I'll tell you one thing about it, there's not many places in America that a slave like me can take free people on tours. You know, don't you tell old boss, but just yesterday I had some gentleman from Germany. He come into the cave. I believe he was a little bit overweight. He wasn't too much happy with what we had to do. We crossed that bottomless pit. He wanted me to take everybody back just cause he thought he made the wrong choice. I believe he says a few choice words to me in that there foreign language. But you know, also, he wasn't a real good guest. We got down that river room, he come to picking up rocks, and I told him, what if everybody come in this cave picking up rocks? Wouldn't be nothing left for people to come in. Well, day after tomorrow went by, he went and told old boss that I kind of yelled at him. Of course, you know, been the position I'm in, I'm not supposed to yell at free folk. So old Franklin called me into the office with Thomas Bransford, my owner and my daddy. He said, now, Matt, we want you to do your job, take care of my guests, I told them to follow your direction to the letter, but please hold it down. You know, it ain't customary for slaves to go yelling at free people. So I learned that I have to kind of hold it down, but you know, this here cave that we're in is just my favorite place in the world, and I don't mean for nobody to deface it. So I'm gonna tell you that right now. So I'll tell you one thing about it. This here cave is truly a mammoth-sized cave, and just the other day we went exploring in this cave. We found some old Indian drawings, we found some stuff down there, and Stephen, he'd already crossed that bottomless pit. He took ill just last year and passed away, so it seemed like me and Nick now become principal guides. So I'll tell you this one thing, that I lost them children last year. Oh, my wife kind of laid around in the bed all summer that she lost and cried for that girl and that boy. And when that last boy was sold, we just bore it the best we could. We got a plenty house, we got good furniture. We do pretty well now. We've been leased out to Master Dahl. Master Dahl's a pretty good old master, you see. And we do good now that we're getting older. But I say, if only we had the children back. But I tell you one thing, they tell me next year the war's gonna be over and I could get my freedom papers. But I tell you right now, if old boss lets me, I'm gonna stay on here at Mammoth Cave. I just believe it will. Well, folks, I gotta go. Nice having you on tour. Do come back and see this cave again. Thank you.
Good evening. I reckon there's no time like the present to meet some new people of Old Barren. I've been watching and listening to some of you as you visit your kinfolk up here from time to time, and from what I can see and hear, I reckon you're all doing a pretty fine job growing this town of Glasgow and Old Barren. I hope you won't mind me bending your ear just a little bit and tell you about the times when I was, how should I say it, a little more lively? Well, I'm going to tell you about how I growed up, about my fighting days, and about what little part I had in growing this town we call Glasgow. My given name was John A. Murray, and I was born and raised in Nelson County to Scotch-Irish parents. Now, they was loving to me, but they was pretty strict on me as well. And that was a good thing, because as a little feller, I could be pretty rowdy if Mom and Papa give me much lead. They raised me as a God-fearing Baptist. That's the way I ended up. But I gotta tell you, I could have been a Methodist or a Presbyterian. It didn't make me no never mind. I used to rile up the old religious hardshells by telling them, I give my left hand to the Pope of Rome, I give my right hand to the Salvation Army, and we march onward for Christ. Well, they didn't much care for that. At 16 years old, I finished up school and decided that I wasn't going no further. I wanted to get out on my own and see what it was like. And I found out that the lessons my parents taught me was going to come in handy, because the next 5 years of my life was probably the most exciting and dangerous times I ever knew. Our country at the time, the leadership of our country, was in a heated debate over states' rights. The question was, how much say should the federal government have over the affairs of the state and its citizens? Well, the southern politicians and the northern politicians couldn't agree on nothing. And before long, the southern ones was a-talking about states seceding. And it looked like we was headed toward war. I have to tell you, I sided with Jeff Davis and the Confederacy. And the reason I did was this conviction that I held, and I still hold, that the government's job is to serve and protect its citizens by common law and democracy, not command and control by force. We felt like the federal boys was making a power grab, and that they was telling us Southerners that we could toe the line or else. Well, I could tell you we was having none of it. If it meant war to stand up for what we believed, well, we just said so be it. As it happened, I served a little over 4 years in the Confederate Army, and I loved the camaraderie, but I got to confess to you that the killing and the fighting and being away from home for so long, it was a sight tougher than I'd imagined. I signed up for a unit that come to be known as the Kentucky Orphan Brigade. And I reckon Southerners started calling us that because so few of us Kentuckians signed up to fight for the Confederacy. Now, I was a good fighter, but I wasn't much of a runner, so I wound up getting captured 3 times. I reckon the Yanks got tired of dealing with me because they put me in chains and marched my wagon up north to where the stockades were up in Ohio and Indiana. But I didn't let that get me down. I showed them what a slick fish I could be, and I escaped the first time. The second and third times they watched me like a hawk. So I had to spend my time either waiting to be executed or maybe even a prisoner exchange. And during that time, I made this vow. If I live to see the end of this war, I was going to make sure that nobody forgot what me and my fighting brothers done. And I was also going to make sure that they was treated right by the people that they served. Does anybody here know if the old statue of Johnny Reb is still standing?
Still there.
Still there. Well, I'll tell you, I had me a time trying to get people to help me pay for that old rascal. It seemed that most of them was a little confused about who the likeness was. So when they asked me, I'd just tell them, why, that's your old daddy. You'd be surprised how quick people was to help pay on something when they thought their kinfolk was involved in it. Truth was, I'd done sent a picture or photograph of my nephew, Richard Garrett. Now, he's buried back here with us. He was a lawyer, you old-timers may remember him. He was a lawyer here in Glasgow for a long time. But anyway, I'm not for deceiving folks, but sometimes you got to tell people what they want to hear. There's an old saying that a rooster sometimes has got to scratch a little deeper in the dirt to get what he wants. Well, after the war, I went back to Nelson County and went to work for the Southern Mutual Insurance Company. And I reckon I must have done pretty good because they started expanding my territory. That's what brought me down here to Glasgow and Old Barron. I'd come down here and work a couple of days, sometimes even a week. Got to know and love the people down here, and before long a group of men from Glasgow approached me and offered me a job I couldn't turn down. They hired me on as the first agent of the Glasgow Railway Company. I worked for them for nearly 26 years. And during that time, I met a woman that was so beautiful and kind. Well, I wasn't going to let her get away, so I made her my bride. Miss Eugenia Garrett, buried right here with me. Me and Eugenia never had no kids, but we made the little ones of Barron our special friends. I used to love to go to the schoolhouses and talk to them about my military service. But it didn't take me long to catch on that little ones will pay a sight better attention if you offer them a little something. Well, you know little ones, they'll do anything for a piece of candy, even listen to an old man ramble on about the war. But that didn't feel like enough. We wanted to do more for them, so Eugenia and I decided that one summer day we'd have a picnic and pay for it for all the little ones of Old Barron and Glasgow. Any of them that would come to town on that day, we fed them. Then we loaded them up on a passenger car on the railway and we rode them out to a park out in Oil City. We let them run and play all day long and kept them fairly well watered with all the lemonade they could drink. And when we was wore out and they finally wore out, we loaded them back up and brought them back to town. Now, I can't explain to you how it happened, but the thing just kind of took on a life of its own. And the rest of the years that I lived, we had a parade, we had the picnic every summer. The last job of work I ever took was my favorite. People started telling me, Reb, you ought to get into politics. Well, I got to thinking that maybe I'd run for county clerk. So I run on the Democratic ticket. I figured, how could I lose? Democratic ticket was the only ticket a real man would represent. And I reckon that the people of Glasgow must have been okay with it. You know, I dealt with a lot of crazies and people trying to kill me back in the war, so I figured that why couldn't I be the county clerk? The people of Glasgow felt the same way because they let me serve them for 3 terms. I want you to know that I never forgot the vow that I made to my fighting brothers. Whenever this community would have a gathering or a parade, I'd made sure that our veterans attended. We'd get up in our uniforms or our Sunday best, and the ones that was able marched, and the ones that was disabled, we give them a seat of honor to watch the thing. Well, they're a calling for me. I'm sorry that our time is so short, but before we part, I'd like to offer you a little something to remember old Reb by. You know, I never forgot that no matter how old you get, you're always still a kid at heart. Would anybody like a little stick of candy? Anybody want one? Come get one. I've got to go. Well, good night to you folks. I appreciate you spending a little time with an old man and letting him bend your ear a little. God bless you.
Hello folks. My name is Cap, as I'm known in these parts, but my given name is Winston Collins. I was born in 1854 in the Bruce part of Barron County. I met and married my wife, Alice Foster, in 1891, and we had 12 children. I became a marshal of Glasgow in the 1890s and served for several years. It was a tough job. I had several duties to perform. I was weighmaster. I also served in police court. I also had to clean and work on the city streets of Glasgow. My hours were long and my wife was very understanding. We had a rough life. Lots of children at home and it was tough. My duties as sheriff and marshal led me to encounter some fairly dangerous people in my career. Certain times I had to actually shoot people. Fortunately, I was never shot. I recall once upon a time a man came into town. It was a Saturday and they were having the fair and he was drinking very heavily. And I asked him to leave town and he did begrudgingly, but he went home and got another jug and he decided to come back and shoot at myself and my deputy, at which time we returned fire and we hit him and he slumped over and rode out of town on his horse. We got word later that he was not killed. He survived that little endeavor there. His name was Clem Depp. I also had an encounter with twins who used to be into lots of criminal mischief. And when I would approach them, one would always name the other as the culprit. So I was never able to capture them until one night I was able to catch both of them at the crime scene together. When I caught them, I was a little miffed at their exploits, so I grabbed them by the scuff of their necks and banged their heads together and knocked them out cold. We took them to jail and they served out their sentences. I've always tried to serve the people of Glasgow in a fair manner and always tried to keep away from violence, but sometimes just the badge or struck words wouldn't do the trick, so I had to use my pistol. I actually had to shoot a man who drew on me in a local drugstore, believe it or not, and he was killed dead, unfortunately. I had a pretty smooth time as Marshal of Glasgow, except for these few occurrences that I've spoken to you about. On my waning years, I got a little deaf, and I was walking down the street one night. It was pretty foggy, and a carriage, horse and carriage, ran over me. And it probably would have killed me, but I was able to draw my Colt and discharge it, and the man who was driving the carriage stopped and helped me, or I would have laid in the street all night and probably died. It was a privilege to serve the people of Glasgow. I always tried to treat the people the way that they would want to be treated, very fairly, and I always tried to do the right thing by the people of Glasgow. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. I was just going through some of my things here in this trunk. Let me introduce myself. My name is Vittoria Leclerc Frazier. I was born in 1757 in a small village in southern France. My sweetheart, Gilbert Leclerc, whom I hope to marry someday, was a member of the French Army. He was sent to America to fight in the American Revolution. While here, he fell in love with this country. Following his discharge after the siege at Yorktown, he returned to France, married me, and was determined that we would start our life in the land of liberty. We then traveled to Lexington, Kentucky, where we met a Mr. William Smothers of Maryland, whom my husband had met at Yorktown. In December, they left me in Lexington and they met up with a group of land hunters that were seeking land in the area of the Green River. They each bought 200 acres apiece, returned to Lexington, and my husband and I began to make preparations for our move. In March, we loaded 3 pack horses full of bedding, tools, cooking utensils, seeds for planting, and other things that we would need. It took us about 3 weeks, and we arrived very near to our destination in Hart County. We were traveling down a very narrow path. There was bushes and cane on both sides. Mr. Smothers was driving the horses ahead of us, about 20 to 30 yards ahead of my husband and I, when all of a sudden shots rang out on the east side of the trail. Both Gilbert and Mr. Smothers fell. A party of 6 or 7 Indians came rushing down the trail and followed the horses. Most assumed the men dead and followed on with the horses, but one stayed back and tomahawked Mr. Smothers and then went after Gilbert. Gilbert recovered just enough from the shock of the bullet that he grabbed his gun and was able to take the savage down in one shot. I ran to my husband and helped him up, and we retreated to a nearby knob. Poor Gilbert, he was in so much pain, but he made it to the knob. That knob is known as Frenchman's Knob. It's located in Hart County. Maybe you've heard of it. We knew that the savages would continue to come after us, and my husband knew that our capture would mean death for him and a horrible captivity for myself. So my husband began to make preparation. He asked me to lay up rocks in front of him to help protect from the bullets if they came after us. He then gave me his discharge from the Army and what little money we had. He told me at the first light of day to go back to the last settlement that we had visited, whether he was alive or dead. We then finished getting ready for the attack in case if it happened. That night was the most terrible night of my life. At that point, I really didn't know that the Indians had not come after us. My husband Gilbert died in the night. Here I was, all alone, thousands of miles away from my home in France. I knew no one, didn't even know how to speak English. You know, I'd only been in the country for a couple of months. Young woman in a strange land. My husband lay dead at my feet, and I had no idea what the next day would bring. At the light of day, I did what my husband asked. I loaded up the things we had and headed towards the settlement. I arrived there about noon. The women were working, but when they saw me coming, with my clothes covered in blood and the sheer desperation look on my face, they came to me. They didn't understand a word I said, but they knew immediately what had happened. They gathered the men and their horses and guns to carry out the campaign that they knew they must. When the men arrived at the site where my husband and Mr. Smothers died, the Indians were already gone, and they were too few in number to pursue them. They buried my husband Gilbert and Mr. Smothers where they had died. I had no idea what the rest of my life would bring. You know, I was skilled in making wine and cheese. I could do weaving, knitting, all kinds of fine needlework. I finally learned English and was able to make a pretty good life for myself. I received many offers of marriage, but I was determined only to marry a soldier. After about 3 to 4 years, I met a Mr. Frazier from the Watauga settlements. He had been wounded at the Battle of Kings Mountain in North Carolina. He began to court me, and we were soon married. We then moved north of the Cumberland River in Tennessee, where we made our home. It was years later that I found out some of the things that we lost in the attack were found. I have a friend, Mr. Henry Skaggs. Have you heard of Skaggs Creek? It was named after him. Henry had found a man named Perry who had been attacked by who attacked one of the Indians and killed him. He retrieved one of the pack horses and some of our things. He assumed the owners were dead, so he took them for himself. His wife loved to keep all the clothing. Actually, they were able to return to me part of my wedding dress that I made in France. I couldn't believe it. They also were able to find and retrieve a paper that proved the ownership of the land that my husband had bought, as well as our marriage certificate. With these items, I was able to obtain a fair price for the land that my husband had bought. You know, after such a tragic beginning to life in America, my fortunes did change. I raised a large family who is now still held in high esteem. I've had a good life, even though all the bad that happened. I guess maybe, just maybe, I've made a small contribution to the settlement of our America.
Hello, I'm Lucy Taylor Goodman. The ladies at the Culture Center wanted me to talk with you a little bit about some of the things that happened during my lifetime. And since family is so important to me, I'll start with that. I was born May 10th, 1894 into a family of 5. My father worked most of his adult life at the axe handle factory. And my mother told me that one year my father made $1,000. So that was the year we remembered as being wealthy, because $1,000 was all the money in the world at that time. As a young woman, I met Will Goodman, and Will and I used to go courting on Sunday afternoon in the buggy. And after a while, we married and moved into a little apartment up on the square in Glasgow, and we lived all of our lives in Glasgow. Now, Will and his 2 brothers had a grocery wholesale business at the time that was doing pretty well, and then the Depression came, and that was a time that was a real hard time for our family, just like it was for a lot of families all across the country. But we made it through that somehow. And then after that, Will became a traveling salesman. He sold items like coffee and honey and sorghum to wholesale grocery houses and to private stores. Now, Will and I were blessed with 2 children and 5 grandchildren, all of whom brought us great pleasure and joy. Our daughter Selma married Dr. Lewis Dickinson, and they had 4 children, Jean, LG, John Day, and Temple. And our son Jack married a real sweet girl named Bonnie, and they had 1 son, William Taylor. Now, Selma and Jack are both remembered for their pleasant demeanor and their strong faith, and I believe they both served their generation well. Now, like most grandmothers who see nothing but perfection in their grandchildren, I'm no exception to that, but sometimes my own children proved a little bit of a problem. I remember an afternoon when I was hosting the Missionary Circle group, and we were all out in the yard waiting for the meeting to start, and my young son Jack came up the hill from Will's shed carrying a jar of moonshine whiskey, which he held up for everybody to see and loudly proclaimed, "This is why Daddy spends so much time down at the shed." I recall another tense afternoon when I got a phone call from a nurse at Howard Clinic. She was frantic. She'd been trying to reach Selma and couldn't get her, so she called me. She called to tell me that 2 of my grandsons, Jake and LG, were sitting in rocking chairs on the 3rd floor roof of their home, which is, as you know, across the street from the Howard Clinic. Well, she wanted to know what she should do. Well, she was just a frantic case, and I didn't know what to tell her, so I thought for a minute, and then I calmly told her, well, just don't look and it won't bother you. Now, most of the time I worked outside the home. I got my first job when I was 16 years old. I was a bookkeeper for the Axe Handle Company, and years later I started to sell Electrolux vacuum cleaners. Now, I guess you could say that I was a pioneer of a sort in my day, because not many women worked outside the home, and even fewer worked in door-to-door sales selling vacuum cleaners. But I sold the vacuum cleaners for 30 years, and I sold over 5,000 vacuum cleaners during my time. Well, this is probably one of them. But I enjoyed what I did. I got to meet a lot of nice people, and I made some money. And that always helps out too. Now, sometimes when I was in my customers' homes, I'd see a child who had a pacifier or a bottle way past an age that I thought was appropriate. So I kept a supply of children's cups in my car, and I'd get one of those cups and I'd trade the child the cup for the pacifier or the bottle. And I was pretty good at that. So I think I helped a lot of families in Glasgow with problems that had nothing to do with house cleaning. Now, I was a devoted member of my church, the Disciples of Christ. I loved the activities and everything about it. I was even able to persuade Will to leave the Baptist church and join mine. So that prompted my mother-in-law to say Will had gone and married a heathen. But I tried to live my faith every day by loving people and being kind and helping people when I could. And through the years, Will and I took several different family members into our home and took care of them for a while. My nephews came to live with us after their mother died, and one of Will's nephews came to live with us for a while. After my mother died, my father came to live with us up until his death. But you know, Will and I didn't think anything about that, because that's what families did in those days. They took care of each other and loved each other, and that's just what we did. I have enjoyed all the phases of my life, from my youth to old age, and I've lived through some ups and downs, having lived through the Depression and 2 world wars. But I've always just tried to put my best foot forward and get on with life. So I think I'll leave you with that thought as you make your way down the hill. But I want to say I've enjoyed talking with you, because it's been a long time since I've talked to anybody. Bye.
Good evening. My name is Mary Biddy Oliver. I was Mary Biddy Lyons before I got married. Smith and I married in November 1906. And right after that, we started running the S.J. Oliver General Store in Cave City. Back in those days, people didn't have cars, so there were lots of little stores located close to where people lived, usually at crossroads. As I said, it was a little store, but we had a variety of things that we sold. We sold food, but it was pretty basic stuff, you know, like rice and beans and flour and sugar and coffee. We had pots and pans to cook it with. We sold farm supplies like fertilizer and plow handles and rakes and hoes and garden seed. In the springtime we had onion sets and seed potatoes. Sold a little bit of sewing supplies. Of course, we had calico and a little bit of rickrack, and then we had thread and pins and needles and a little bit of lace. We also sold school supplies. And if there was anything that I didn't have, somebody could ask me to order it, and I'd write it down right here on my order pad, and I'd have it for them in, 2 or 3 weeks. People pretty much paid cash for things back then. If they didn't have it right away, they'd charge it, and then they'd come in at the end of the month and pay for it. And when they came in to pay for it, we'd give them a bit of a treat, you know, a piece of fruit or some cookies or some candy, because we appreciated them coming in and paying their bill on time and in full. We had a lot of good people come shop at our store, and some of the folks even brought in produce and traded it for merchandise, which was good for both of us. So we met a lot of nice people in that store. As I said, it was a small store. Sometimes we had to hang things from the ceiling, like baskets and toys and just about anything that would hang, we'd put it up there because it freed up floor space. Something I remember real well about the store is the aroma during the holidays. We'd order in oranges and apples and nuts and things like that that people like to put in the kids' stockings that Santa brought. And the oranges were a real special treat because they didn't grow around here, and transportation, of course, wasn't what it is now, so they were special. They were a luxury. Another thing we kept around at Christmas time was that stripy candy canes. Oh, candy, that reminds me of a story. There were two little boys that came in the store one day, and they didn't know that Smith and I were watching. They started filling their pockets with candy. Then they walked right out the door without paying for it. Well, Smith walked right out the door after them. And he said, "When are you going to pay for that candy you took?" And the boys said, "Well, we don't have any candy." Well, it was obvious. Their pockets were bulging with candy. So Smith, he reached out and grabbed one little boy by his bib overalls, turned him upside down, and shook him just a little bit. Well, you know what happened. All this candy started falling on the floor. Well, that other little boy that was with him, he really got scared, and he started unloading his pockets real quick. Those boys learned a lesson. They never did that again. And Smith and I, every time we remembered about that, we sure got a good laugh. You know, next to our store, we owned a mill. And every Saturday, folks would bring in their turns of corn to be ground into cornmeal. And our son, Pearl, he just had a big time playing with the kids who were there waiting with their parents for the corn to turn into cornmeal. Another thing that was part of the store was the post office, because people had to come pick up their mail because there wasn't any delivery back then. And what I really loved about that was I got a chance to chat with people when they came to get their mail, and got to find out what was going on in their lives and things like that. Of course, I already knew a little bit because I sorted their mail. You know, after World War II, more folks started getting cars, and they started going to the bigger cities to buy their groceries and their clothes and their household goods. I guess they had a better selection there than we did in our little store, and by the mid-50s, business was pretty much falling off. And by 1960, we had to close the store. There just was no more business. So Smith went to work for the post office. He was delivering mail out in Lucas and Fountain Run and in between in Austin and Tracy. And just about that time, I decided I was going to go into business selling Avon. You are looking at the first Avon lady in Barron County. This here table has got some of the samples on it that I used to have, some of the lipsticks, some of the perfumes, and some of my cream sachets that were real popular. And this is one of the catalogs that we used to hand out. Back then I lived on Leach Avenue here in Glasgow, and I sold out of my house. You know, I think my great-grandson Gary and his wife Sheila raised their kids in that house, and they still live in that house. But it sure was different when I was there. See, Smith took the front bedroom and he put shelves up all the way around so I could display my product. And he put in tables so my ladies could sit down and try out their makeup. Oh, I had so many ladies coming to my house to buy makeup and perfume. I'll bet there's at least one person here that may have come to my house with their mama or their grandma when they were little. You know, Avon was a good fit for me because there weren't a whole lot of jobs for ladies back then. And it added to our income since we had to close the store. But what I loved about it most was I got a chance to socialize and talk to people and to serve my customers. And those are two of the favorite things that I liked about running the general store. Smith and I were married for 62 years. They were good years. Newspaper reporter asked me one time how I managed to stay married to the same man for 62 years and keep him happy. And I told him I knew what the solution to that was. Every year on his birthday, I made him his favorite fried chicken dinner. So, ladies, remember that. That's a good tip. Smith and me, we had us a good life together. I'm so glad you stopped by to see me tonight. I hope to see you again, but not real soon.
Good evening. My name is Hayden C. Trigg. I was born here in Barron County in 1834 and continued here most of my life until my passing in 1913, where I have occupied this spot back here since. I'm sorry to have to entertain you in this place, although I have a beautiful view here. I would much prefer to have you down to our home, The Beeches, which is across from Maple Driveway, but I think you folks nowadays refer to that as South Green Street. Unfortunately, it burned in 1922, broke my dear wife's heart, but I will tell you about an event that we held there at one point. It was a meeting of the Bankers Association. We had a table spread beneath our trees, which was 100 yards long. It was loaded to the groaning point with barbecued lamb, broiled spring chicken, country ham, pone bread, brick ice cream, Lady Baltimore cake, and oh, so much more. It was the talk of the town. Now, I was never affiliated with any particular religious organization, although I am a Christian. We had a room in our home that was referred to as the Prophet's Chamber, where we frequently met with ministers and other good men. And it was also used as a conference room for community leaders when they needed to conference. Now, I was not born in town here. I was actually born on my father's farm south of Glasgow. And I'll say that was quite wild country back then. I remember on occasion when my father was away and my mother, Mary Frances, was left. She heard a sound outside that sounded like a baby crying. She took the rifle, stepped outside, and that day she shot and killed a panther with only one shot. I suppose that area is where I developed my love of hunting. Now, you know you have to have a pack of dogs if you enjoy the chase of the red fox. And enjoy the chase I certainly did. I also took great care to protect the game, never killing unless it was fairly caught in the open by the dogs. Now, some people prefer night hunting. Personally, I like day hunting much the better. I like to see the fox being pursued by a pack of fleet hounds in full cry. To me, that's the most exciting sound possible. But if those of you who don't have time to hunt during the day, night hunting does have some advantages. For me, here in Barron County, I didn't have diversions such as the theater, lectures, and other entertainments that other city folks have. So I was free on the long winter evenings to enjoy the chase, and I certainly did. On cool winter evenings such as this, the sound of the hounds is much more musical than it is in the daytime. In the evening, the fox stands up better. The game is less wild and more easily found. There's less interference from livestock. And the sound of the hounds as they pursue the game, to the experienced ear of the sportsman, is actually music, and he can tell you which hound is in front, which one is in back, and what kind of game they're pursuing, what direction they're going, and everything about those animals just from the point of standing and listening. Now, my uncles and I, we believed that we had to have the best animals available, the best dogs for the task at hand. We started with packs of birdsong and Maupin bloodlines, and to that we added some Walker hounds, And pretty soon we had developed what became known as the Trigg Foxhound. Now, I differ from most men, and I won't tell you that my dogs are the best dogs on earth. Just because dogs happen to be able to lead their pack at a particular time and place and do an extremely good job doesn't mean there aren't others who might do as well. Now, dogs are a lot like racehorses. They're all the best until they meet their betters in competition. The true sportsman is not so prejudiced, but what to admit that there are other dogs who might equal his own, and that by crossing with other dogs, he might not develop a better bloodline. Now, rather than expound my own words upon my dogs, I'd love to tell you what other people have said about them. I've gotten letters from all over the state, from all over the South, from as far away as Africa, about the qualities of our Trigg Foxhounds from here in Barren County. One of my favorite letters comes from a gentleman named Cullum in Weatherford, Texas. He writes that the dog Jim that he got from me a short time ago has to be the best dog that has ever gone into the woods. He reports to me that in one season, fall and winter, he was able to bring back to him that he kept 23 foxes, 17 wolves, 3 deer, and 1 wildcat. And he has reported that he's never heard of that kind of progress from any other animal, and I'd have to agree. Paul Rainey, the famous African hunter, has used my Trigg Foxhounds to hunt lions in Africa. Now, dogs haven't always been my passion, although it has probably been my greatest. I was a businessman in Louisville for 15 years, came back here for health reasons in 1866. Started a banking business with Thomas C. Gorin. Our bank was called Gorin Trigg and Company, and it operated under that name until 1873 when he retired, and then it continued under my name up until my death. Now, I also was president of the Glasgow Railroad Company. Now, I'd like to tell you about an incident that involved that. As president of a railroad company, when you travel, you're afforded a free pass on other railroad lines by virtue of your position with your company. I wrote for my free pass with one railroad that I had planned to travel over, and I got a letter back saying that they had never heard of me or my railroad. I politely wrote back and said, if you will check the directory, I'm sure you'll find both of us listed there. In short time, I received a response that yes, my name was listed as the owner of a railroad company, but my railroad was only 12 miles long. I wrote back, again, very politely, and I said, yes, sir, your investigation is accurate. My railroad is only 12 miles long, and I assure you it's not nearly as long as your railroad, but it's every bit as wide. In the next mail, I received my free pass and enjoyed travel on that company. There are a number of other things that I would like to report to you, one of which is how I met my lovely wife, Ann. I was standing in front of the bank one day, and her mother, Louise Ballard, drove by and had her twin daughters with her. My brother Jack was there, and I turned to Jack and said, Jack, those are lovely ladies. I should marry one of them and you should marry the other. And in a short time, we both did marry. He married Charlotte and I married Ann. Ann and I had 9 children, a wonderful life together. I had had 1 child from a marriage to Betty Hawkins, which had ended when she died at a young age. Ann was always good in family matters, but she did write on one occasion that I was like most men and seemed to have little time and less inclination to keep up with ancestors and family matters of that type. But she added, but he can tell you the pedigree of every dog that he's ever been involved with. She was very good to take care of those matters and did with my mother until my mother passed at age 87. I'll pass some of that information on to you. My grandfather, Hayden Trigg, immigrated to Barren County from Virginia. He became the first legislator of Barren County, and he opened and built the first cotton gin in Barren County. He later moved on to Tennessee, but left myself and my father, Alonson Trigg, here along with my Aunt Fanny, where we continued to reside the rest of our lives. I have or had a great uncle, Stephen Trigg, who fought in the Revolutionary War, among other places, the Battle of Blue Licks, and it is for my great uncle Stephen that Trigg County, Kentucky received its name. Now, during the Civil War, my mother would occasionally hear of raiding Yankee parties that would come into this area because this was predominantly a Confederate area at that time. She would go around the house and to the family and gather up the silver and the small valuables in her apron and hide those in the base of our grandfather clock. Fortunately, those were never found, and the grandfather clock remains in our family even to this day. I have a brother, John Trigg, who actually fought and rode with Morgan's Raiders, a Confederate organization here in this area. Unfortunately, he was captured in raids into Yankee territory, but he was released after the war and did come back to Barren County to live. I suppose I have bent your ear far too long, but I certainly have enjoyed you being here. And if any of you have a nice Cuban cigar, I would certainly enjoy that. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed one. Thank you all very much.